This video makes up the second part of an interview with Dr Nimrod Novik, a board member of mפקדים, למען, ביטחון, Israel, which translates as Commanders for Israel's Security, an organization that strongly opposes any unilateral moves to annexation by Israel of any parts of Judea and Samaria. In this episode, I discuss the support by this organization for the Arab Peace Initiative and other risks and concerns it has about annexation. One of the key tenets is in your vision statement is the Arab Peace Initiative, which supports a two-state solution. So this is the framework that you've adopted to bring about the two-state solution, which is the option that you're favouring. Now, I'm going to just play a video now, if it's okay with you, Nimrod, which is once again produced by the Israel Policy Forum, which tells us about its strong support for the two-state solution. And then let's come back and we can discuss some of the aspects of the Arab Peace Initiative with you. Okay, we're back, Nimrod. We've just been watching a video and I wanted to ask you, in connection with the two-state solution, does the Arab Peace Initiative not call for the return to the indefensible pre-1967 lines with comparable and mutually agreed minor land swaps, whatever that might mean? And in exchange for this, the Arab states would allegedly consider the Arab-Israeli conflict over, sign a peace treaty with Israel, and establish normal relations within the framework of a comprehensive peace. This is the model that you've adopted. Is this realistic?
As you probably know, in 1967, after the war where we were attacked and conquered Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as well as the Golan Heights, the Arab world convened in Khartoum and took a decision that had three parts: no negotiations, no recognition, no peace with Israel. In 2002, at the initiative of then Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, the Arab League convened and offered Israel a completely different formula. You guys reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians and you got us all. Once you sign with the Palestinians, you get peace with all of us. And if that was not enough, they took the same resolution to the Islamic Conference that has 57 countries. And they embraced it in a meeting that was held in Tehran, Iran. And Iran was the only one that abstained of the 57. So the Arab and Muslim world have sent a message in 2002 to Israel. You resolve your differences with the Palestinian Liberation Agreement based on certain principles that you enumerated. and you got comprehensive peace with all the relevant Arab world. Now, much has happened since, and certain Arab countries are still struggling with the consequences of what was used to be called erroneously as the Arab Spring. Libya, Syria, Yemen, you name it. But the main players have moved one step further. And I've been involved in that step. I've been working with Saudi counterparts for well over a decade on a second change in the Arab position. And that was that steps towards normalization with Israel will not wait until after the process is concluded with the Palestinians, but can accompany that process. That the Arabs will show in the Israeli public that they are serious about normalization, not only as a trophy that Israel will get at the end of the road, but also as down payment as we do travel the road. And some of these we have witnessed, and you have witnessed. Just yesterday, we had another landing of an aircraft bearing the signs of the United Arab Emirates landing in Ben Gurion Airport, unprecedented. We had a dozen or so such nano moves. But bottom line is, the Arab world, or at least the main players of the Arab world, the so-called Arab Quartet, which Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Egypt, understood that it's not enough for them to sit on the balcony and watch Israelis and Palestinians struggle, but if they want to see a resolution of the conflict, they have to become players. And they have to impress the Israeli public that they are for real, that the Arab Peace Initiative is not a mirage that will disappear the morning after we sign a treaty, but rather that they are for real, that regional cooperation, security, economic, tourism, soccer, whatever, football, whatever have you, is for real. And since then, we have seen Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, invited to these Arab countries. We've seen Israeli athletes invited to compete in these countries. Israeli flag and national anthem have been played in these countries. They are sending a signal that they are for real. All this does not suggest that any of us at the 300 plus commanders are naive to assume that a peace treaty with the Palestinians is around the corner. Our commitment to Israel's security and future as a Jewish democracy says one thing: let's do everything to separate from the Palestinians. The ultimate objective is a two-state solution. The framework can be the Arab Peace Initiative. But when we accept the Arab Peace Initiative, or when we accept the Clinton parameters, we're not losing our sovereign right of decision on details on the ground. And the fact that you accept the Arab Peace, some people say that the Arab Peace Initiative includes the right of return of Palestinian refugees to Israel. In my judgment, in my interpretation, it does not. But whether it does or doesn't makes no difference, because there is no Israeli leader who will accept the right of return. So the Arabs can claim that their position is the right of return, and we'll tell them no, and we'll sit down and negotiate. And I'm not afraid that my representatives in the negotiations will not stand firm on our strategic interests.
I mean, some might say that the Arab Peace Initiative is, for all intentions and purposes, a document of capitulation. It's an acquiescence to virtually all Arab demands that successive governments have been rejecting as unacceptably hazardous, and that will forego virtually all the gains of the 1967 Six-Day War. And going on further than this, if we're going to return, can I just go on a little bit further?
Sure, sorry.
A little bit further with regard to if we're going to return to basically pre-1967 lines, or some approximation thereof in compliance with the precepts of the Arab Peace Initiative, would you suggest, would the commanders for Israel's security suggest that these lines would actually leave Ben Gurion Airport within the mortar range of the Palestinian state or not? Would that not leave the Trans-Israel Highway Route 6 within tunnel reach? And what security arrangements have been done to ensure air road traffic will be kept under safe control? And what preemptive punitive measures are envisioned to prevent or punish any disruption? What would be the diplomatic repercussions of such measures? And what would be the economic impact of such disruption, or even the tangible threat thereof? What land swaps are envisioned to compensate the Palestinians, as stipulated in the Arab Peace Initiative, for land appropriated to secure the airport highway, creating frontiers that deviate from the 1967 frontier? So it seems Israel potentially would put itself under very serious threat by having a Palestinian state right next to its border in a proximity that, with the geographic advantage they have, would make it much greater threat than Gaza has ever presented.
All right, with your permission, I'll make a distinction between the fear of the so-called Bitchonistim, and first, you know, somehow we established without notice that those minority of past security officers who think different than we do are legitimate argument, whereas when we argue, then we don't have the credentials to make those statements. But be that as it may. One thing is to be afraid of words, which I think is nonsense, and to be afraid of the language of the Arab Peace Initiative is nonsense. Nothing that we say about the Arab Peace Initiative deprives Israel of the capacity to stand on its national security and other vital interests. And when we tell the Arabs, the Arab Peace Initiative, in our view, is one thing: comprehensive regional peace. We strike a deal with the Palestinians, and you guys come to the table and sign. And we all go to Washington and have the White House catering to our joy. So let's distinguish between words and substance. And the second part that you quoted about the risks of Palestinian sovereignty close to Israeli border is a valid argument, but it does not stand the test of security arrangements that can be implemented and has been accepted by the Palestinians. The Palestinians have long accepted, as a matter of fact, they present it as their interest, not as a concession, as their interest, that Palestine will be demilitarized. They don't want an army. They don't believe they have the resources to sustain an army. They don't believe that ever a Palestinian army will be able to defend a Palestinian state. And they count on Israel to deter their adversaries and secure their independence. Second, there is a huge difference between a situation where the Palestinian majority consider the violent minority as those who represent them, as those who do right for them because they fight for sovereignty, and a situation when the overwhelming Palestinian majority consider the violent minority as risking the very existence of the state they just acquired. They know that there is no Palestinian capacity to challenge Israeli security. The gap between us, look, Israel is the strongest country by far within 1,500 kilometers in each direction. There's no combination of adversaries that pose an existential threat to Israel, with the possible exception of a nuclear Iran, but that's not our issue at the moment. And when it comes to nuclear, it's no longer Iran. Nuclear anywhere can be an existential threat. But no combination of conventional forces can challenge Israel's overwhelming security
we're not talking about
certainly not the Palestinians. Now, when we talk about the Palestinian state, and we're not there, and I'm sorry that we're taking the conversation into what is by far over the horizon, rather than deal with the imminent threat of annexation. But I follow your lead, of course. When we talk about security, about the security arrangements that we will insist upon in an agreement with the Palestinians for statehood, that will involve several layers. Layer number one is the robust security arrangement on the border between Israel and Palestine. Layer number two is our ability to supervise and confirm that the state of Palestine is forever demilitarized. And there are means for us to do it. Three, the quality of security arrangements between Palestine and its outer neighbor, which is Jordan on the one hand with the West Bank, and Egypt on the other hand with Gaza. And we will insist, and we have the structure of how robust these security arrangements are going to be. The next layer is the security buffer, the strategic depth offered to us by security cooperation with Jordan on the one hand and Egypt on the other. The next layer is a regional security structure involving these countries plus Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states in the context of the security annex to the Arab Peace Initiative, which is being discussed but will not be drafted before progress between Israel and Palestinians. And the last layer is a complete Israeli control in terms of military presence in the air over the Palestinian state, and of course over Israel, but also over the Palestinian. Early warning of anything approaching the Palestinian state will be ours. Early reaction to anything approaching the Palestinian territory in the air or on the ground would be ours. So the security arrangements are going to be quite robust. Does it mean that the decade after we sign and implement, and implementation will take 15 years, no less, to test Palestinian compliance, to enable us to organize all the security arrangements and other arrangements that are required? And the Palestinians understand that it will take 15 years to implement the agreement and to test their capacity and intentions. But can anybody sign that there will never be a terror act coming out of Palestine? Are we invading and occupying Lebanon because there might be a terror activity from Lebanon? Are we invading and occupying Egypt because there might be a terror incident from Egypt? And we had them. We had them. But for 40 years since the peace treaty, not a single Israeli was injured because of a decision of the Egyptian government. That was worth it. We gave up Menachem Begin gave up 3 times the size of Israel. And people told him exactly what Chronistic are saying now concerning the West Bank. Exactly the same argument. It will not last. They will violate. The Sinai is demilitarized? No, they will move troops the morning after. It's a one-bullet agreement. Once President Sadat gets a bullet in the head, the agreement is over. Well, sadly, he was killed. And even the Muslim brother president did not dare violate the agreement. And we now have Egyptian troops in the Sinai because Israel allowed it for a joint cooperation against ISIS and other destabilizing elements. When you are to make a decision whether to go for a peace agreement or not, the calculation is of risks on both sides. And what Menachem Begin asked his chief of staff at the time, when he did it with Egypt, is what the Prime Minister in the future will have to ask his chief of staff when he goes to do it with the Palestinians. And that's the following question. Not how good it's going to happen, but if worse comes to worse and all hell breaks loose, what will be the cost of undoing the damage? And if the cost is reasonable, then the risk is of changing the dynamics is worth it, because there are risks if you strike a deal, and there are risks if you don't. We have experienced a portion of the risks of not doing it. The first Intifada, the second Intifada, the lone wolf knife Intifada, and who knows what is in store. We have seen Hamas take over the Gaza Strip because we have weakened the Palestinian Authority. Can we embolden Palestinian leadership to take over the Gaza again, do away with the Hamas policy, force Hamas to become a political party and not a terrorist organization? I don't know if it's doable, but is it an objective that we are trying to pursue? We are so frightened from any change in the status quo that some of us are incapable to see that the risks can be mitigated and the advantages maximized. And we are so strong that it's time to get our act together and cautiously and carefully and security-based pursue an alternative policy.
As you know, Nimrod, Israel went into Lebanon on 2 occasions, and with serious consequences. And isn't it highly likely that that Israel will, if there's a Palestinian state where the same kind of behaviours occur that were evident within Lebanon, that we're going to see the Lebanization of Palestine and terror forces there? Perhaps not major Arab armies are going to threaten Israel, but terrorists in numbers infiltrating into a Palestinian state could potentially turn a Palestinian state into another Lebanon.
Likely no, possible yes. And let me suggest how I would look at it. Twice we withdrew from area that we occupied as a result of a defensive war. Twice we withdrew and got peace, sustainable, stable, and that's with Egypt and with Jordan. Twice we withdrew without an agreement, unilaterally, left a vacuum, and terrorists filled that vacuum. Once in Lebanon, when Hezbollah seized the opportunity. Once in Gaza, when Hamas seized the opportunity. The lesson to me is not that whenever you withdraw, you get terrorism, but that whenever you withdraw without an agreement, whenever you withdraw without robust security arrangements, that's when you get terrorism. So it doesn't mean that there will not be extremists on the Palestinian side who will try to challenge their own government and get them in trouble with us. And we will have our extremists who will try to get us in trouble with the Palestinians. Provocateurs will be there always. Question is, will they be supported by the masses of the public and therefore have safe haven, and people will hide them and shelter them and help them and provide them with whatever they need? Or will people pick up the phone and tell the authorities, this guy is planning something very terrible that is going to get us into trouble? The state of Israel will not be shaken up by a terrorist from Lebanon or a terrorist from the West Bank. Israel can be challenged by other things. But between the possibility that at some point there will be an act of terror. And the certainty that reoccupying the West Bank will be bloody for years. Who will benefit on the Palestinian political arena? Who will benefit from the reoccupation by Israel? The Fatah and Palestinian Authority, or Hamas and Islamic Jihad? Who will become more popular? Who will get support from the grassroots public as manifestation of Palestinian aspirations? Those who tried to negotiate and got a slap in the face? Or those who always said the only language Israel understands is violence? So we are going with open eyes in a direction that is so dangerous, and for no good reason. The neon sign on the Jordan Valley will say Israeli sovereign. Where is the difference for the 6,000 Israelis who live there anyway? For the IDF bases that are stationed there anyway? And if you want to look over the horizon, which I really am reluctant to, for security arrangements, nobody will be able to cross the Jordan River from Jordan to the West Bank after a peace agreement without us knowing it. Nobody. Just as they can't do it now. And it doesn't take Israeli battalions on the ground. We are in the 21st century. There are other ways of detecting from distances the troops that are deployed cannot see. And as long as we have cooperation with the Jordanian armed forces, our security is upgraded rather than downgraded in a security in an eventual two-state agreement. But we're not there.
So we've got certain dependence here on the Arab states that we're going to make deals with in the scheme of things, that they're going to remain stable, and we don't necessarily see that as being the case. I mean, there was a move potentially of Egypt to become under the control of the Muslim Brotherhood. We see Qatar, for example, as a case in point. It was one of the most amenable Gulf states at one time, and now is a prime funder of jihadist terrorism. So if commanders of Israel's security believe that the Palestinian issue is not of central importance to many Arab states, and many Arab states today are expressing a viewpoint that they're sick and tired of Palestinianism, they're not concerned about that anymore. Why does Israel have to make such dramatic and dangerous concessions on it, just so that these states would deign to cooperate with Israel to further other far more vital interests of their own? So one might well ask why Israel should have to make any concessions to induce Arab states to cooperate in advancing what are in fact their own national interests in building economic relationships with Israel.
Well, we commanders are not in this business in order to satisfy any Arab. We're not in this business to satisfy Arabs in the Gulf, Arabs in Egypt, in Jordan, or Arabs in Palestine, the Palestinians. We're not in this business to satisfy them. We're in this business in order to secure Israel's future as we understand it. And we are convinced that the only existential threat to Israel as a strong Jewish democracy is a demographic issue. If we are sucked into annexing the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, my grandchildren will not live in a country that reflects the vision of Ben Gurion and the pioneering generation. Between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River today, it is roughly 50-50 Jews and non-Jews. I don't want to go into whose rate of birth is greater. It's almost irrelevant. Because 50-50 is not a Jewish state. 60-40 is not a Jewish state. Let alone if we lose our majority. So I'm not in this business to satisfy an Arab who wants a relationship with me. I'm in this business to secure the future of my grandchildren and their generation. And for that, we must separate from the Palestinians. And if a two-state solution is not within reach, then we do the separation in a way that is not a two-state agreement. And we don't do it in a way that we did it in Gaza. We don't move one soldier from its current deployment within a plan of separation. No unilateral separation anymore. Was a huge mistake. I mean, I'm glad we did it because of other reasons, but the way we did it was so wrong. Unilateral withdrawal without securing who takes over in the wake of our departure. It was clear who would take over. The strongest party on the ground, the terrorists, the more violent ones. It's not going to happen on the West Bank. We're going to keep in our agenda, okay? Our advocacy is in the process of separation from the Palestinians, reducing friction between Israelis and Palestinians on the West Bank, improving the lives of both communities. We keep the entire area as a security deposit pending agreement. And if agreement comes in 5 years, 10 or 50, we keep our security presence as required by security challenges. That doesn't mean that we continue to slide in the opposite direction of becoming a one state for two peoples, where we lose our Jewish identity and democratic values.
Now, there's a whole discussion here that I don't want to get into because we definitely don't have the time. We're only talking here about two options. We're talking about a two-state solution and a one-state solution, but there are many other models. And you know of Yishai Fleischer, who's put out 5 different alternatives that were published in the Huffington Post. And I don't want to go into these, but I don't think that we necessarily have to be bound by concerns that the only options are a two-state solution and one-state solution, and that's the way that too many people, I think, have been looking at the issue. But I want to.
I beg to differ. I beg to differ. I don't care if somebody develops a model for federation and confederation, whatever other model. I want to make sure, and so are we in commanders, there is a clear border between Israel and Palestine. Where that border is should be left to the negotiators. But that there is a border, and that beyond that border, there are the layers of security arrangement that I suggested earlier. And whether somebody wants to give it the look of something other than two states, I don't care. I just want to know that there is a firm border when they are there and we are here. Now, there are all kinds of illusions. There are illusions that Egypt will volunteer territory, will never happen. Illusions that Jordan will volunteer territory, will never happen. There are all kinds of illusions. I don't want to get into them. What is important to me, or to commanders as such, is that there is a border between a sovereign Palestine and a sovereign Israel. In Palestine, the Palestinians have their expression. In Israel, the Israelis and the Jews have their own self-determination. And the relations between the two are governed by normal relations on the civilian side and robust security arrangements, which are heavily skewed in Israel's favor on the military side.
Jonathan Tobin, in a recent opinion piece he writes for Commentary magazine, he wrote a piece entitled "A Disingenuous Debate About Annexation." And he ends it with these words: living in the past and clinging to the false hopes of the 1990s won't build support for Israel or nurture the alliance between the two democracies. It's long past time for liberal American Jews, even the Oslo cheering squad, to accept the reality of Palestinian rejectionism and the permanence of the West Bank settlements, whether or not they believe that they were a good idea in the first place. He points out, trying to undermine the new Israeli government or setting the stage for a conflict with the Democrats should Trump lose in the fall isn't consistent with their aims of being ardent supporters of the Jewish state. Nostalgia for the illusions of the past should never be confused with activism that actually helps Israel. So he's basically saying that what you are perhaps pursuing is something that's built on a platform or an idea that really we should be pushing to one side.
So he does.
And let me, in this...
I think I spent the last hour and 15 minutes trying to explain why his position is I mean, he's articulate and he knows how to put it into nice words, but it's nonsense.
Can I just give you another quote? And I suppose you won't be able to, I don't think you're going to guess who made this quote, but I think in this context of what we're talking about, it's quite interesting. And let me make this quote. Historians 1,000 years hence will still be baffled by the mystery of our affairs. They will never understand how it was that a victorious nation with everything in hand suffered themselves to be brought low and to cast away all that they had gained by measureless sacrifice and absolute victory. Now the victors are the vanquished. That is the terrible transformation that has taken place bit by bit. Can you tell me who made this statement and when it was made? Let me explain. This statement was made by Winston Churchill in the House of Commons in March 1938. Can you see the relevance of this statement to Israel's situation?
Yes, it is. So much has changed. I would put it just to be humble. I mean, I'm an admirer of Churchill. So to be humble, I would just say the following. When history, as he says, in 1,000 years, will judge victory and vanquished, or gains or spoils of war, the pros and cons, I'm not sure that control of a territory that I love, a piece of real estate that I'm attached to for historical, biblical, religious, national reasons, but comes with a bonus of 5 million Palestinians, that holding on to the land is a prescription for victory rather than for vanquish, because the 5 million are not going anywhere. So if I have, as a victor, to relinquish control over the 5 million in order to save my people of a very troubling future, and if I believe that in the 21st century, territory is not what it used to be in terms of security. It's not the next hill that you control that determines your security. In the 21st century, with everything that we can launch from the air, from the sea, and from the ground, with cyber warfare, with everything else, the next hill is not the issue. I would say that whoever argues that the next hill is the issue given the threat to Ben Gurion Airport is stuck in the previous century and the one before that in terms of what is modern warfare and how do you defend a high-tech society like ours. So yes, in 1,000 years, I don't know what will be the judgment, assuming the globe will survive what we're doing to the environment for that long. But let's assume that it does. What will be the judgment? I don't know. When I look around the corner, which is as far as I can see, I say, let's pay the territorial price in order to avoid the demographic disaster.
Well, it's only a matter of 2 or 3 weeks until Israel apparently will be making a decision, but it may be delayed. And we, I think, have seen, Nimrod, quite a shift in public opinion. And I think your commanders for Israel's security have been perhaps one of the forces that have been instrumental in this shift. Because if we go back to 2019, a poll in Haaretz that I was looking at just a little bit earlier shows that the majority of Israelis at that stage was in support of annexation. It wasn't by much, but there was a majority at that stage. But I think at this point of time, the polls are definitely shifting. But on the other hand, governments are voted in on the basis of policies that they say they're going to undertake. And Israel's government, under the control or under the management of Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, made the obligation to the Israeli public who voted them in to do just what they're about to do. So if they're not going to do it, they're going to obviously have had a lot of people whispering in their ear to change their mind and perhaps have apprehensions about doing that at this particular time.
I humbly beg to differ with your appreciation of where the public was and is on the issue. I think if you ask, are you for or against annexation, period, what is my response? I'm for annexation within agreement, within a territorial swap concept. So what should I answer a question, are you or are you not supportive of annexation? What is the use of a question that has no context, doesn't suggest alternatives, and is totally detached from potential costs? So we asked, are you willing to support annexation even if it risks, we didn't know, risks, the relations with Jordan? 89%, including from the Likud, said no. People intuitively understand the importance of security, of relations with Jordan. When you ask the four classic options, are you for a two-state solution? Out of the 4 options, which one do you support? Two-state solution, separation from the Palestinians, other than in an agreement, status quo, or annexation. Here, before Netanyahu embraced it, it was 10, 11, 12%. And since he embraced it, it is 25, 26%. Consistently, the Israel Democratic Institute, Tel Aviv University, the Interdisciplinary Center, as well as commanders, each did their own independent polls, and came up with roughly the same findings, and that's for 2 years now. The only change was, by the way, to my astonishment, status quo is the least popular, which I intuitively would have thought the opposite. There is a total disconnect between where people are on annexation or two-state or the 4 options and their vote to the Knesset. Because Israelis don't vote Palestinians. They don't vote the Palestinian issue. They vote Netanyahu, yes, Netanyahu, no. They vote Gantz, yes, Gantz, no. They vote economy. But when you ask Israelis to rank the issues of importance in shaping their voting, the Palestinians are number 6 or 7. So I think the public intuitively rejects opposition for fear of the demographic issue, is not fully versed with the possible ramifications, but is certainly not supportive of the idea. And I don't think that the reason, assuming the government goes there, and you're right, the prime minister is leading in that direction. Assuming the government goes there, it will not in response to public demand. It will be in response to other needs of the prime minister.
Yeah, well, if you actually look at polls of the public, when they look at the issues that the Israeli public is concerned about at the moment, I think the issue of annexation is way down the list. Concerns about the economy, of course, as Israel's under the brunt of the coronavirus pandemic and so forth, much bigger issues that Israel's got to worry about, and so forth. So,
you know, if we in commanders succeeded in one thing, I'm sorry. If we in commanders succeed, we in commanders failed in one thing and succeeded in another. We failed in generating public awareness of the issue. Somehow, until maybe a week ago, literally, for the preceding 2 years, our efforts to generate public interest in the subject, and as you suggested, it's a single-digit interest in the issue until a week ago or so. We failed to alert the public to what we think are the devastating consequences, or in general, to enter the debate. Where we did succeed is in bringing the analysis to the attention of over 100 members of Knesset, including members of the cabinet and people around them, as well as the defense establishment and others. But in terms of the decision, which will be made in the Knesset probably, about over 100 of them, we had there this one-on-one, 1.5 hour deep discussion of the ramifications. And we found that one accomplishment was not necessarily changing the minds of diehard annexationists, but across the board, introducing one consideration. Until 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, a year ago, the conventional wisdom was that this is a risk-free proposition. That the Knesset will decide. We will see 2-3 weeks of international condemnation, maybe a demonstration here and there, and it'll be over. And everybody has a laboratory to show that's the Jerusalem issue. When the Americans moved the embassy, when the Americans recognized, we had a couple of weeks of rumbling, and that's it. But when we demonstrated what we call the domino effect, the chain reaction we lose control over, the trigger for a chain reaction, and where it might go, and we don't know if it will, but where it might, suddenly they all realize that this is no risk-free proposition. And as a result, at least one thing happened, and that is a demand that the decision will not be made before the government undertakes an equally thorough study of the issue as the study that we completed and have presented to the lawmakers. So we failed with the public, and we somewhat succeeded with the decision makers.
Well, we won't have too long to wait and see what's going to happen with the deadline. And I must thank you very much indeed, Nimrod, for talking to me today on my program, The Israel Connection. I think today I've actually done what I believe is probably the longest interview I've ever done in my 5 years of running this program. So that's certainly some achievement. So I can thank you for that, and we've done it all on Zoom as well, which is another achievement. This new medium that so many of us are finding is now becoming indispensable in our lives. So thank you very much again, Nimrod. It's been great talking to you, and I'm sure that my listeners will appreciate hearing what you have had to say.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we Israelis have not many occasions to communicate with the Australian audience. So I greatly appreciate the opportunity you provided me with. And thank you for this entertaining, challenging conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Bye-bye.